Good morning, everyone. It's later in the morning today. It's Friday, so I observe a ceremonial practice on Fridays. I get up at 7 o'clock as opposed to 5:30. So I've had a little bit of additional sleep. Look, we're at this is reflection number 8, I believe, and we're now at principle 2. Manage connectivity in principles for building resilience. At the Zoom session yesterday, I made a point about the entire text, and I want to make it again now and reference the text in order to illustrate what I meant yesterday and what I still mean today. I suggested yesterday that the text has a lot of science in it. It draws from a range of different sciences. You can see ecology in it, sociology, economics, information theory, computer science. It's an amalgam of scientific contributions mixed together under the general title of resilience. I suggested yesterday, is a theory that is very much in its infancy. So much of this borders speculation. Now, why would I say that? You can see it in the text. You can see it in the language of the text. So I'm going to draw your attention to some modalities, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. I'm not trying to confuse you with that term. If you turn to page 88, go down to the second complete sentence on this page. It reads, empirical studies in social networks demonstrate that the strength of connectivity, and we'll be talking about this, for example, the frequency or duration of the interactional may have different effects, may have. And then at the very next sentence, for example, it appears that actors and so forth. Then down in the same paragraph, it's, I think, the penultimate, the second to last sentence, it may in fact be the last of this paragraph. These findings suggest that social network connectivity can facilitate, right? That's a modal verb, can. It means it is possible that it facilitates. That's perhaps, in a logical sense, the weakest possible claim you can advance on behalf of a proposition. This can be true. This may be the case. This might happen. Those are very weak claims, right? So, and you see it again, just down 3 or 4 lines. Among actors with similar types of knowledge or economic preferences can hinder. Later, just bump down to the next paragraph. Network theory suggests that non-random configurations, etc. Now, why do I bring this up? Because I think it illustrates the extent to which this text is speculative in nature. So it's a little bit, I would argue, deceiving. Why? Well, you open this text and there are all sorts of scientific references in the text. Look at the bibliographies for the chapters. They go on and on and on. And most of that literature, it would appear, is scientific in nature. So again, drawing from the various sciences that I alluded to earlier. So this is a general point about the entire text, and I think it's very important. Do we have well-substantiated science in this book? No, no, I don't think we do. Some of the claims advanced are well substantiated, but most of them, it would appear, I haven't gone through all of them, most of them are not. So the authors are honest about it, which is wonderful, because you could, of course, use different verbs. Rather than can, you could use is or are, and the claim becomes much stronger. They also, by the way, mention themselves, and this is a credit to them. They mention several times that the evidence, the empirical evidence, so the link to reality, is feeble. It requires additional research. It's not well-founded. So I think we should take this entire text, therefore, not with a grain of salt, but understand, pay attention to the verbs, pay attention to how they formulate these claims, because if you do, you'll see how tentative most of their conclusions are. So that's just by way of general note. So we're at chapter 3, and we're looking at connectivity. Sorry, we're at chapter 4, and we're looking at connectivity. I just have the book in my hand. And I wanted to say a few things about it. I don't think connectivity is a difficult notion in principle. Whether it applies and the degree to which it applies to different systems in reality, that's a separate question. But I think connectivity itself is a pretty clear idea. Most of you, I'm sure, are aware of nodes and networks and graphs, not graph theory, but just the idea of a graph, or the idea of a network diagram, where you have a whole series of nodes, which are points of interest of some kind, that are connected in a variety of different ways. And you can permute the variety. That is to say, you can simply add or subtract from the variety in a whole range of ways by drawing links from one node to another. So this is the picture they tend to have in mind in this chapter. So connectivity, a system, say, with 3 nodes, 2 of which are connected, has low connectivity, right? So connectivity is in part a function of the number of links and the number of nodes. So I don't think there's anything too complicated about that. Another thing I would say is not unlike what we saw in chapter 3, too much connectivity can be a bad thing. Too little can be a bad thing. And I think it should be clear why. If you think of that diagram, the network diagram, you have, say, 10 nodes and 15, 18 different links. It should be, I think, clear enough that when you think through this, your connectivity is, in a sense, a measure of the extent to which those links connect node to node. So the idea when it comes to resilience is the more nodes you have, the more pathways you have of potential response. You, of course, can have too many pathways of response so that the system finds it difficult to select an optimal path, right? So keep that in mind. I found it strange, I have to be honest. I believe they have 2 separate definitions of connectivity in this text, and I was a little bit surprised they don't see it. The very first sentence, and I applaud them for this, why not start at the beginning? Connectivity refers to the structure and strength with which resources, species, or social actors disperse, migrate, or interact across patches, habitats, or social domains. Now, again, those habitats and social domains, to go back to the network diagram, I go back to it because it's such a simple illustration. What we're talking about is the species or the habitats would be the nodes, and the links would be the connections between them, right? And you're looking at the strength and the structure of those links. Now, in my opinion, they say more about strength than they do about structure. But in any case, now let me, by way of underscoring what I said about science and all of this being rather tentative, on the opening page of the chapter, which is page 80, you will read, despite increasing theoretical work that evaluates how connectivity affects the resilience of social ecological systems, we still largely lack empirical studies that quantify these effects. I don't know why they have to quantify the effects. They could just support the effects. This insistence on quantification is a bit strange, but we see it everywhere in here. And it's connected, I believe, to the issue of measurement, because they do say connectivity is hard to measure. And connectivity is not the only thing that's hard to measure. I would say to you, there's a fair bit in the entire discussion. For example, diversity and redundancy. Redundancy can be difficult to measure. So can diversity. How do you interpret diversity? You have to provide some model of it, some picture of it, some construct of it before you can measure under it. So when they say, oh, it's difficult to measure, I suspect part of the reason for that is it's because it's difficult to build the construct. When you measure something, you need to have a construct of it. And by a construct, I mean, how do you conceive of the process or the phenomenon that you intend to measure? You know, you never measure in a vacuum, right? Never. You're always measuring with something in mind. So I suspect part of their problem with measurement here is definitional in nature. It's that the construct itself is not clear, so you don't know where you should go to measure, because the construct is what guides you to the measurement. So that's a bit of background on this, but I thought I would bring it up. Now, they mention on 81, oh, my phone is beeping. They mention on 81, I hate my phone. They mention on 81 the recent financial meltdown as an example of system collapse. It's an interesting point. We'll go back to it, because somewhere in here I noted it, and I hope I can find it. They come right out and say what I think I said yesterday in the Zoom session. I may have said it in the reflections. Once you start adding the social dimension, people, there are problems. Why? Because you're moving away from the strict logical model of a complex adaptive system. Once you introduce people, and they seem to recognize that here in a rather oblique way. So I'm curious to see whether it will surface in this text. So again, on 81, they refer to a growing body of theoretical work and few empirical studies. So I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to critique them by saying they're not clear or, they're not making any sense. All I'm trying to say is we should be very careful here in understanding this to be a well-grounded science. This is not. This is a theory under construction. So just keep that in mind. I worry about it because it has the appearance of a well thought out scientific approach. And it is a scientific approach, and they're working through it, but it does not appear to be particularly finished, if you know what I mean. It's not a polished version of itself. It's still very much under development. Now, I mentioned the two definitions. We had a definition referring to structure and strength, which I just read out. Here's the second definition, and it's only a page away. Connectivity refers to the way in which parts of an SES, right, interact with each other. Well, that's a different focus for a definition. So connectivity refers to interaction, but connectivity also refers to the structure and strength with which resources interact across patches, habitats, or social domains. That's not quite the same thing, right? One definition says connectivity is interaction, period. The other definition says, no, it's more than that. It's the strength and the structure of the connection, right? So I'm not saying these two definitions are incompatible. What I'm saying is they go down different routes. They are disparate. They're different definitions. Whether they're incompatible is not clear, I would say. But I'm not fond of a definition that specifies two properties, strength and structure, whereas the other definition, though it deals with the same basic phenomenon, connectivity, it never makes reference to strength or structure at all. It just talks about interaction. So I bring that up because I thought it might be important down the road. Now, on page 82, I wanted to stop for a moment. In every system that can be conceptualized as a sum of individual components, connectivity refers to the nature and the strength of the interactions between these components. That could be treated, I think, as a third definition. I put up two as a third definition. I've mastered basic math. I want you all to know that. So how does connectivity enhance the resilience of ecosystem services? And please note, once again, I don't want this to be long, this reflection, but I find that it bounces around resilience as a property. Is it a property of the SES, of the ecosystem services? Is it a property of the service itself? Is it a property of the governance? Because the term as indicating a property, the term is referred to each one of these things. So I haven't quite figured out in my own head if resilience is a property, what is it a property of? I haven't quite sorted that out. There are various candidates: the ecosystem service, the SCS itself, the space between them. It's not quite clear to me. So I thought I would mention that. Now, on 83, they have a diagram that I can't quite sort out, but take a look at it, give it some thought. They're just different ways of structuring links, right? So you have a random structure, and I think we all know what that is. We have a nested structure, think of Russian dolls, and we have a modular structure. Modularity meaning a kind of compartment within the system. They talk about that here. So on 83, just to cite the text in particular, the strength and structure of connectivity may safeguard ecosystem services against a disturbance either by facilitating recovery or by constraining locally the spread of a disturbance. Now, these are two important points. How does connectivity matter to resilience? In two ways. It matters to resilience insofar as it provides a means of facilitating recovery after a disturbance. So if the parts and components within a system are connected, it has greater integrity. So it has a greater ability to survive turbulence, right? It's well put together, so to speak. So as it bumps into waves of turbulence, because it has more integrity, it's more able to survive the ups and downs, the booms and bangs of turbulence. You know, think of air flight. If you've ever had the horrible experience of being in a turbulent flight, you'll know what I'm talking about. So in any case, it assists in the recovery of systems, and it assists in constraining systems, right? So the constraint is that idea is a little bit different. Recovery, I think, is pretty straightforward when it comes to connectivity. The idea of constraint is a little bit more sophisticated, maybe we could put it that way, or more complex. The idea, I think, here when it comes to constraint is the number of links within a system also constrains its performance, right? So a system, all of these properties of resilience, right? You can have too much or too little of it. So if you have too little of connectivity in a system, it's not well put together. It's not cohesive. So again, think of turbulence. You enter a phase of turbulence, you're in a system whose parts are not that well connected. Well, as things start to bump and jiggle and, shift, the system will begin to degrade and it will begin to deteriorate, to lose its integrity as a system. So those are the two core ideas, I think, under connectivity. So recovery is important to resilience, and constraint is important to resilience. I'm not sure I would call it constraint. I think it's more a matter of cohesion. So I might not understand this well enough, and that's just a note to you. So please read carefully here. I'm not convinced myself that their way of putting it is very clear. So my lack of clarity could just be me. There's no doubt about that. It wouldn't be the first time. But I think it might be the text. So now, perhaps the most highlighted positive effect of connectivity, this is on 86 at the very top, on the resilience of SES. Now here, resilience is a property of the SES, is that it facilitates the maintenance of biodiversity in the landscape, which underlies the production of many ecosystem services. I know what they mean, but their wording is peculiar. Why? Because this sounds like biodiversity underlies the production of many ecosystem services. No, I think it underlies the ecosystem services themselves, right? Here's a case of confusion for me, a specific example. So we have connectivity. So the connectivity is in the diversity of the landscape or the species it contains. But that doesn't underlie the production of anything. I don't see the connection to production. Production arises when we turn to a natural system and say, we want to use it to some end. Production is a human activity. So I just not altogether certain how I should interpret this section. It's a little bit difficult to penetrate it, in my opinion. Now, ecosystem services on 87, they give examples, and they give examples throughout the book. Food production is an ecosystem service. I just, I have a serious problem with that term, because food production, well, there's an industry, right? Food production, think of craft. Food production is an economic activity, human economic activity. So is food production an ecosystem service? I'm just not sure I understand that. And you can see by the pause, I hope, I am genuinely, I won't say confused, I'm bewildered. I'm reading this text and thinking, okay, I think I get it. Now, I mentioned the human element. On 87, in human social networks, it has been argued that connectivity can facilitate the resilience of ecosystem services through enhanced governance opportunities. Yeah, they talk about this, and this is connectivity outside of a complex adaptive system in the standard sense of the term. This is about connectivity in human systems. Governance is a human activity. We should keep in mind, complex adaptive systems have no governance. And also, so far as I'm concerned, I don't want to draw a conclusion forever here, but the complex adaptive system, it doesn't have leaders either. There's no governance and there's no leadership. That's why I keep mentioning automaticity of the complex adaptive system. If you look at models of complex adaptive systems, where are the leaders? There are no leaders. The system doesn't require them. Now, this should take us to a fundamental point. And the fundamental point is, if we're talking about transformation, we need leaders, right? So we can't turn on a switch that turns on the big complex adaptive system that we live in, the SCS, and get that work done automatically. No, we're going to have to sit down and think it through, right? We have no option. As I said, our frontal lobes keep getting in the way. So where am I now? Let me see. Under what conditions may resilience of ecosystem services be compromised? Compromised when there's too much or too little connectivity. I think that's the story here. And I don't think it's very difficult to sort that out. They talk about, unsustainable resource extraction, where you violate good governance of ecosystem services. I wanted to say something about, on page 95, it's just about the language. For example, models of Madagascar's dry forest dynamics suggest, right? There's that word again, that rapid declines in pollination services. Pollination services? Who's doing the pollinating? The bees. Are the bees working for us? Are they providing a service to us? I mean, this model is just odd. And I feel that way. But there's much in here that's of value. So I don't want to, throw it in the trash. It doesn't deserve that. As I said, we need to keep in mind these authors are being honest and sincere, and we should do likewise, right? We're witnessing something that's just beginning to take shape. So it's not a surprise that the links are not clear. What we could borrow the language, the theoretical language, to critique this text and say that it has low connectivity. That's a little bit cruel, but anyhow, operationalized and applied. I'm not going to read these. Mapping connectivity. Imagine mapping connectivity in a sizable social system. Good luck. Identify important elements, etc. I'm not going to go through that. I wanted to say one last thing. I'm not going to say it because I've already said it. I'm just looking through the text here. I have some notes. So that might be enough. Look, again, this text has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of citations to the literature. Take a look at them, not in order to, look them up and read them, but if you look at it, this is almost all scientific literature. So you can see just by reference to the bibliography that this is very much a kind of potpourri, a pastiche of theories borrowed from this domain, that domain, and that domain, right? So it's not a surprise that this is shifting and moving in several different directions at once. So I want to suggest that you read this with a spirit of charity, right? That your reading is charitable. These people are, I think, launching a new intellectual craft onto the sea of human thought. And it's not yet well put together. I think there's water coming on board. It's not clear the ship is going to make it to its destination, but they're doing their best. And I think it's important. We also should acknowledge that this approach may become much more rigorous and cohesive and coherent over time. So we're at the dawn of this. We need to keep that in mind. So with that said, I wish you all a wonderful long weekend, now that I know this is a long weekend. And take a break, breathe, relax, and we'll talk next week. And thank you. Bye.